Begin Self-Publishing episode number 93. My top podcast revisited.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
Way back in episode number 28, I did my top 10 podcasts, and in episode number 8, I also did other self-publishing podcasts, where I discussed my favourite self-publishing podcasts. So I thought it's time I kind of revisited this area of my favourite podcasts. Okay, it's got nothing really to do with self-publishing, but I actually think that in terms of a medium to find out free information about things, podcasting is unrivaled. And while I don't listen to as many podcasts as I used to, I still do listen to a lot of them. So it's a lot cheaper than audiobooks and written books. Looking back at the shows I said were in my top 10 podcasts, 2 of them aren't running anymore, which is The Mystery Show and Web Search Social. The Mystery Show was actually cancelled because it was too expensive, which is a shame because I really enjoyed it. And Web Search Social, I think the people who are running it have gone on to do different things. I've actually seen the people who run it a few times at various conferences, and I've been meaning to go up to them and say, what happened to the Web Search Social podcast? But I haven't had the courage yet. So if I do discover, I'll tell you. I've added a few newer shows to the show notes of my episode 8 podcast, namely Paul Teague's Self-Publishing Journey and a&nbs's Micah Tab podcast. There's also a new self-publishing podcast from Mark Dawson called The Self-Publishing Formula, which is fairly good to listen to as well. I have noticed, though, that there are no shortages of self-publishing podcasts to listen to. So thank you very much for listening to this one. I will still be out of the country when this podcast is aired, but I'm going to go through a few extra shows I've discovered since those ones, and also some of the runners-up for that original top 10 podcast. I've got more into writing and general writer podcasts since then, so there will be a few more actual specifically writing podcasts in this list you may want to check out. First one is the rather well-known podcast of Grammar Girl. This is a fairly short podcast where the host goes through some fairly unpatronising, for a change, advice about grammar and word usage. I kind of resisted listening to it, thinking it was going to be quite sort of, this is how you should do this, and actually it's not at all like that. It's very, very positive in the things it goes through. And I've learned a lot by listening to Grammar Girl's podcast. The next show is another writing-related one, which is the Story Grid podcast. Sean Coyne, who is a experienced editor and is the author of the Story Grid, he's basically going through the process of editing a fiction book with Tim Gruhl, and they're doing basically Tim Gruhl's writing drafts of the book, and then Sean Coyne is going through editing it. It can be a little bit long-winded at times, but it's actually a very, very interesting show. So you get the chance to listen to the Story Grid podcast, that's well worth listening to. Another fairly short writer podcast is Writing Excuses. Every week this has fairly short writing tips. It's not so much about grammar, it's more about things like structure and genre and setting and that kind of stuff. Again, it's definitely worth listening to, especially as every show is only a quarter of an hour long. Now, out of the world of writing podcasts, there are a few business podcasts that I've discovered recently. One of them is The Fizzle Show. Now, The Fizzle Show is actually very good because it's arranged around a community called Fizzle, and I found the advice in it to be really good. It's a very jocular in nature show, and I know some people just can't stand the format of it. But I really love the fact that it's very conversational and the people in it are quite silly. It's one of those things to try out. If you love it, you love it, and if you hate it, you hate it. But I think it's definitely worth at least listening to a few times, The Fizzle Show. Another more formal business podcast is The Business of Story. Park Howe, who is an expert in business storytelling, interviews various entrepreneurs about how they use storytelling in their businesses. I find this quite interesting in as much as writers we should be using story in our marketing efforts, but clearly most of us aren't. So I think it's a good show to kind of try and bridge that gap between writing and business. Another business-related show that I've discovered is one called Under the Influence with Terry O'Reilly. There's quite a few Under the Influence shows on the podcast directory. So this is the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation one. Terry O'Reilly is an advertiser who has been running this podcast for a while, and every episode is really, really interesting about various aspects of advertising or just marketing in general. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a tips-based show, but it's more kind of like makes you think. So it's definitely worth trying out and listening to a few episodes of that. Another show which started out as a self-help show, but has actually turned into more of a business show, is The Art of Charm. Now, you may be thinking that The Art of Charm is actually a dating podcast about dating advice, and it did start off that way. But I have to say now it's much more just a business and business communication, with every now and then it has a show about something to do with dating or relationships. So don't be put off if you're not in the dating position. And finally, something that's totally unrelated to business or writing is Undisclosed. Now, some of you may have heard of the show Serial. In fact, I think I might have mentioned it in a previous show, where they were going through one particular court case. Well, Undisclosed has been going through quite a few cases of miscarriages of justice, and I find it a really interesting show. If you're interested in crime and crime podcasts, and Undisclosed, if you haven't listened to it, it's really worth listening to. It's all, of course, based on miscarriages of justice, but it certainly makes you think about things, if nothing else. So that's my update on my podcasts that I've listened to. This month is officially, apparently, #tripod month, where people are being encouraged to hashtag their favourite episodes onto Twitter and other social media. So do feel free to tweet this show with #tripod. Hopefully it'll bring some people to my website and also introduce some people to these other podcasts that I mentioned. So next week I'm going to be back in the real world. We will be back to the interview format and the regular shows from next week. So talk to you guys next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.